on a wall in 1745. Now the vaulted chambers that you see over here, this is now the Unicorn Cafe. A lovely coffee and a slice of cake now. But back in the day, ladies and gentlemen, these vaulted chambers were bomb-proof. This was a safe haven for the soldiers. Had this castle been under attack. Just behind you, in that Queen Anne garden, you'll see more of these vaulted chambers. They're now housing the castle exhibition. Definitely worth the wee visit later on. Again, back in the day, another safe haven for the soldiers. Where we've just been standing, this is known as the Overport Battery. That's where the big gun stood to make sure nobody was coming in that front door. Where you've bought your ticket today, well, we now just call that the Guardian Square. But back in the day, ladies and gentlemen, the garrison here at Stirling Castle called that area the killing zone because they could have got you from above, the middle and below. Ladies and gentlemen, those Jacobites never came through this front door, and I think even if they had tried, I don't think they'd have been very successful. I would now like to invite you all through the grand entrance here of James IV, and we'll make our way into what we now call the outer close. Holiday! Charge! Ladies and gentlemen, we are now standing in what we now call the outer close. But when the castle here was a royal residence, this is us all standing in the service area. I've just rung you in the front door. The archway down there, that used to be the back door. That whole grass banking over there used to be a full level of kitchens. The well's still there, where they got the water to prepare all the food. You had workshops here, blacksmiths, gunsmiths. This was a very busy part of the castle. And in the reign of James IV, there was a gentleman here with his own workshop, a gentleman by the name of John Damien. And he was here getting paid handsomely by the king because John Damien was an alchemist. And he had told the king he could turn base metal into gold. Now, as we are all aware, that was never going to happen. And John Damien was starting to fall out of favour with the king, who was getting rather annoyed about all the money he'd been handing over and still no gold to show for it. So to get back into the king's good books, John Damien decides to make himself a set of wings. He tells the king he's going to fly over to the royal court in France and find out all the news. As you can imagine, there was great excitement here at Stirling Castle as John Damien was preparing for that maiden flight. He stood in an area we now call the Ladies' Lookout. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, he was even going in the wrong direction that morning. But John Damien's saving grace was the fact there was no plumbing at the castle back then. There was no toilets. All the waste got poured over the side into what us Scots would call a midden. So as he stood there that morning, flapping those wings, John Damien jumped. Now his flight was 70 feet, straight down, but he got a nice soft landing, only broke his leg. The reason he told the king his flight had been unsuccessful was the fact that he had used chicken feathers, and that chickens can't fly. I'm now going to take us all over here and tell us why this kitten. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are now standing in what we now call the Grand Battery. But when the castle here was a royal residence, this was a full level of kitchens. In 1689, 1 year after the start of that glorious revolution, the garrison here at Stirling Castle really feared an attack from those Jacobites. So they decide to knock the top level of kitchens down, the level that's underneath was infilled with all the rubble from the top to make a solid base to hold all these guns. But the guns don't fire in 1689. The guns don't fire until 1746, when on the 8th of January 1746, Charles Edward Stewart arrives in Stirling, otherwise known as Bonnie Prince Charlie. He arrives with his Jacobite army. The people of Stirling are terrified. An army has just descended upon them. So they hand over the key to the gate of Stirling almost immediately. He then decides he's coming up here and he's going to take Stirling Castle. But the garrison that was here stated they weren't going to surrender. They were going to put up a fight. So Bonnie Prince Charlie went to set up his guns to come in the front door over there. But the big guns that stood on that overport battery fired a few warning shots, destroying a number of homes at the top of Stirling. The people of Stirling couldn't believe it. Their homes were getting destroyed. So they came up and they asked Bonnie Prince Charlie if he would move. And he duly obliged. He packed up from there, made his way over here to an area known as the Gowan Hill. Now when you look through where the cannons are pointing, you'll see a small graveyard. The grassland behind it is the Gowan Hill. The Gowan Hill is like the rock on which Stirling Castle stands. It's volcanic, it's solid. They couldn't even dig in. That should have set the alarm bells ringing for him to move somewhere else, but he didn't. He persevered. Even if his men had taken out all these guns, they'd have still had a climb to get into the castle. That didn't put him off either. The Jacobites fire first. The guns here at Stirling open up and the battle barely lasts half an hour. The Jacobite guns are blown to smithereens. Bonnie Prince Charlie then packs up what's left. He then heads north to Inverness, your Battle of Culloden. Never again is there another Jacobite uprising. But the last castle, ladies and gentlemen, ever to be under siege was here in 1746. I would now like to invite you all out the back door of Stirling.
It's our rest in the hot country, not here. And on the table,
quite apt. Oh, gets me a bit of that chuckle as well. Someone that you I'm at Bannockburn. I'm at where the primary school is in Bannockburn. I'm at just about. Brought you all through the oldest surviving part here at Stirling Castle. It's known as the North Gate, and it dates back to 1381. In the reign of Robert II, grandson of Robert the Bruce, and the first of your royal Stuarts. That was your back door. There was a portcullis here and a guardhouse just here to make sure you weren't getting in the back door of Stirling Castle unless you had an invite. But around 1520, James V decided to enclose this area by building this curtain wall. This is now known as the Nether Bailey. This is where he kept his hunting dogs, mainly deerhounds. Birds of prey were kept down here. Cannon was repaired, but the buildings that you see standing today date from when Stirling Castle was very much a military garrison. The small building here, this is a jail dating from around 1810. We've even got a prisoner in here by the name of Paddy Maguire. When you go in, ladies and gentlemen, give Paddy a wee wave, but go into the cells next door, close the doors over, and you're able to read graffiti that's been left there from prisoners from over 150 years ago. The other building down there, again, the same date as this one, 1810. That's the powder magazine. That's where the garrison stored over 800 barrels of gunpowder. And the fear that if it was going to blow up, they hoped it would only blow up down here and not any of the royal buildings where they were all staying. I think it would have took out part of Stirling. Right at the very bottom of this path, you have the tapestry exhibition. Now, during the restoration work of the palace of King James V, Historic Environment Scotland decided they would love a set of tapestries to hang in there. Unfortunately, none of James's had survived. So what were they going to do? They got a team of girls from a college from down south. They sent those girls over to New York where they studied a set that hang in the Met Museum. Those girls then came back here to Stirling Castle and they replicated them. It took them over 40 years and a cost of over £2 million. All the information about the tapestries is right at the very end of this path in that tapestry exhibition. But the tapestries finished in 2014 and they are now hanging in the restored palace of King James V in the Queen's Inner Hall. And definitely a must-see before you leave us today. Now I'm going to march us back up the hill and I'm going to stop us outside our great
signal that to you.
No, is it one of my colleagues to hand it in the main gate? I thought maybe one of us who were heading down. So ladies and gentlemen, I have just stopped us now outside our great kitchens. Now we still call them our great kitchens, but they're not as great as what they once were. When the castle here was a royal residence, the kitchens went all along that grass banking, all the way right round. You see that arch touching onto the great hall over there. When the king and queen resided here, they had about 450 staff. A lot of mouths to feed. Never mind a great celebration going on in that great hall. Even more mouths to feed. But in 1921, they were doing excavation work here at the castle and they uncovered the bottom half of the kitchen that was infilled in 1689. They've taken all the rubble out. Down the stairs here, the ovens, the fireplaces, they're all original. But in the 1990s, Historic Environment Scotland have brought them back to life. It's like going back in time down there. You're getting to see what was getting served here to royalty when they resided at Stirling Castle. The Master Gunner's house, well, that's how important that young man was. Built at the same time as the Grand Battery because he was here to make sure if the guns ever needed to fire, he had them in good working order. In the top part of the North Gate, that was converted into kitchens around 1512. Behind the arch, touching onto the Great Hall, if you head in behind there, you can still see what's left of the serving hatches where the food was passed into that Great Hall whenever there was time of celebration. You'd have also had an ale house here because beer was the preferred beverage of choice. Even the children drank the beer. But don't worry, ladies and gentlemen, we weren't drunk Scots all staggering about up here. It wasn't that alcoholic, but it was very nutritious. And the process to make it made it safe to drink. The water, most certainly, was not. I am now, ladies and gentlemen, going to start the short walk up to the royal part of Stirling.
What's going on?
It's all okay. Yeah. Enjoying the lovely Scottish weather. All part of it, isn't it? Yes. So ladies and gentlemen, here we are. We've now arrived in the royal park here of Stirling Castle. And you can see that with all the buildings that are surrounding us. They've all been built by a royal steward in a period of just under 100 years. The oldest building is this one up here, built by King James IV in 1496. This was his home, ladies and gentlemen, built here on the highest point at Stirling Castle. But it looks very different today as to how this looks when James resided here. We know that ground floor was all vaulted chambers used for storage. James's rooms went from the first floor right up to that roof. Big open spaces, an outer hall, an inner hall, a bed chamber. He even had his own private kitchens up here. This is where James would have entertained any royals and nobles that arrived here at Stirling. But it's the only royal building that's not been brought back to its former glory because there's been that many changes over the years. All these small rooms with sash and case windows, that's a feature that we've inherited from when the army was here. This building was converted into your officers' quarters. And on the 18th of November, 1855, disaster strikes when one of those young officers' rooms catches fire and the whole north end of James IV's building was destroyed. It was rebuilt 2 years later by a Victorian architect by the name of Billings, and you can see how different that north end of the building now looks. Above the two furthest away windows, you'll see a rose and a thistle. Yes, it is a thistle. It's not a pineapple, as we get asked on many occasions. That's there, ladies and gentlemen, because James IV marries Margaret Tudor. She was the daughter of Henry VII. She was the sister of Henry VIII. This marriage takes place in 1503, and the marriage was known as the marriage of the thistle and the rose. And 100 years later, in 1603, you have the union of the crowns, when James VI of Scots becomes James I of England, and it's all because of the marriage of this young girl to James IV. Inside this building today, it now houses the Regimental Museum of the Argyll and Southern Highlanders. They were formed here in 1881. This is their spiritual home, and it's only reopened in the June of 2021 after a £4 million facelift, and opened up by who was then the oldest serving Argyll, Her Majesty the Queen. She had been Colonel-in-Chief of the Argylls since her 21st birthday. 75 years she was in charge, and she came here to honour them, to open it all back up. Now, even if you don't like a military museum, ladies and gentlemen, up in that first floor up there, there's even a Lego hunt. There's 11 Lego figures, and they're all hiding in that first floor. I would now like to invite you inside my favourite spot here at Stirling Castle, and I'd like to invite you all inside the Great Hall. Follow me. We have now arrived at the Great Hall here at Stirling Castle, again built by King James IV in 1503. And back then, this was the largest freestanding medieval hall, not only used in times of celebration, but when the king resided here, Parliament was held here as well. And when James IV's brother-in-law found out that the King of Scots had the largest banqueting hall, he was a bit put out. So Henry VIII attempts to build an even bigger one at Hampton Court. But one of the most memorable occasions that takes place inside this great hall happens in the December of 1566. when Mary Queen of Scots had her son James christened in the chapel that stood outside. She then parted in this great hall for 3 days and nights. She borrowed £12,000. In today's money, just a wee bit over £2 million is what Mary spent on her extravagant celebrations of the christening of her son James. Down this end of the hall, this is your minstrel's gallery. This is where all the musicians were playing to entertain all Mary's guests. The alcove in the wall over here, this is your trumpeter's loft. A fanfare will resound from there whenever royalty walked into this great hall. Mary's guests, they were all kept nice and warm. You've got 4 large fireplaces down here. The tables were set down either side. The middle was left for your dancing. The dais end of the hall, ladies and gentlemen, this is where your royal sat. And you can see that because you have to take a step up, because your king and queen was a step above everybody else. The big windows were only down that end of the hall because in 1503, glass was very, very expensive. The largest fireplace, again, was reserved for your royals. And on the third night of Mary's celebration, she takes her guests from this great hall. She heads outside Stirling Castle to where we've parked your car today, or got out a coach, and she has the first ever firework display here in Scotland to end the 3-day celebrations of the christening of her son James. But Mary's son James, he inherits that English throne, and in 1603 he heads down south. He promises us Scots the earth, but he returns home only once. This castle then starts to fall into disrepair. At one point, ladies and gentlemen, this great hall was getting used as a cattle shed. Then the army starts to move in, and by 1790, the army have no need for a large banqueting hall, so they convert this great hall into army barracks. 300 men live and sleep in this great hall. To get them all in, another 2 floors are inserted. To get that top floor on, the original hammer-beam roof was taken away. Beluck, one of the young army gentlemen, takes very detailed drawings of what's being removed. And also James IV, he builds a great hall in Edinburgh Castle, although not in such a grand scheme as what we're all standing in today, but it has the same hammer-beam roof. 1964 comes, and the Argyll and Southern Highlanders march out of Stirling Castle for the final time. And that's when the ball starts rolling to get this great hall back to her former glory. And it takes all the way through to 1999 to what we are standing in today. They had to find a specialist company for this hammer beam roof. 350 oak trees were felled. There are no nails, there are no screws. 4,000 wooden pegs is what's holding that ceiling up there today. And that company was in awe that they were replacing something that had been here in 1503 without the aid of all the lifting equipment that they had to get all that oak up there. Now, part of the original floor has still survived, and to preserve it, they've kept it underneath. They have then inserted underfloor heating and a lovely level walking area, because not only has she been brought back to how she lived, she's been brought back for her original intention. You can hire here, people get married in here, you can have a party in here. The last Stuart to entertain in this great hall, ladies and gentlemen, was Rod Stewart. J.K. Rowling's hired it for a charity event, and the whole place was done out like hobblers. Do you like Harry Potter? Yeah. Well, keep us inside and tell us about the colour when we're in. It's dry and it's warm. Yeah. Yeah. Inside. The army had all these original windows. They were all bricked up. There was doorways punched through where there never should have been doorways. So when the stonemasons were working on the outside, that's when they start finding small pockets of the original light paneling. Some of it still had tiny flecks of golden paint still on it. And that's when Historic Environment Scotland decides, let's go the whole hog. Let's bring her back to how she looked on the outside in 1503. Every building here at Stirling has been built with sandstone. And the lovely Scottish weather can be quite corrosive to it. So this lime hardening is like a plaster, and it's applied on top of that sandstone, and it's there to protect and preserve. But it's grey in colour. What king would want a large grey building? Certainly not a Scottish one, that's for sure. So a lime wash is then added. Burnt ochre is added to that lime wash. Now you've got, ladies and gentlemen, King's Gold. And not only called that because of the colour, because back then only a king could afford to do this to his building. And not only was the Great Hall this colour, James IV's house was this colour. That grand entrance that I brought you all through was this colour. James V's palace, where we're going to head next, was this colour. It's said back then a Scot thought of kings siding a house made of gold. But the only reason it's done on the Great Hall and not the other buildings is because it needs done every 10, 15 years. There's enough maintenance work going on at the castle without us adding to it. So they've done it on the Great Hall, and they have left the rest to your imagination. And on a sunny day, and yes, we do get them, the Great Hall can be seen for miles. I can only imagine how spectacular this castle must have looked back in the day. But let me assure you, in 1999, when all the scaffolding and all the tarpaulins came down, that's not what the people of Stirling thought. They were appalled. The phone was ringing off the hook, people complaining about the awful colour. They even wrote to their MPs. It was brought up in the Houses of Parliament that Historic Environment Scotland had vandalised the Great Hall here at Stirling. To this day, they still come in and they still don't like it. I reckon you could have called this colour Marmite because you either love it or hate it. There doesn't seem to be an in-between. But we're now going to head over to the palace of King James V. And we do have written evidence, ladies and gentlemen, at one point was pink.
What would you watch? No, like the very
Asking my husband about it the other day. He served his time as a homemaker in the Great Hall. His father was there. Yes, apple.
Sorry.
No, you're okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now standing outside the palace here of King James V. This was built here at Stirling between 1538, finished around 1542-43, and sadly, we don't even think he even seen it finished. James dies in the December of 1542, a young man, aged only 30. He leaves a 6-day-old baby. She's just been born at Linlithgow Palace to James's second wife, Marie de Guise. And Marie de Guise brings that infant here to Stirling in the July of 1543. The infant was Mary, Queen of Scots, and the palace here at Stirling was Mary's childhood home. Now, the reason her mother brings her here is to try and keep her safe. Henry VIII's after her. He wants her betrothed to his infant son, but he wants the young Scottish queen brought up in the English court. Her mother is having none of it, brings her here to Stirling to try and keep her safe. When she feels she can't keep Mary safe in Scotland any longer, that's when Mary, aged 5½, is sent over to France. Now, inside this building today, another restoration work, finished in 2011, took over 10 years, and it cost £12 million, has been brought back to how it would have looked when Mary was carried in there as an infant. You've got 3 Queen's apartments and 3 King's apartments. Inside the Queen's Inner Hall are the tapestries I told you about earlier. Now, I'm not taking you in. I'm going to be telling you a wee bit about the outside. What you are looking at, ladies and gentlemen, is like nothing else you'll see in your travels around Scotland. This palace is a one-off. There are over 250 carvings on the outside. This side's about the best preserved. I think we've been a bit sheltered up in this courtyard. But the statues you're looking at here today is James V telling you how he was going to rule Scotland. And he's telling you through the medium of Roman gods. The first one is abundance. The second one is Saturn. The third one is Venus. The fourth one is Ganymede, cupbearer to the gods. And this is James telling you he's going to rule with a golden age, with peace, plenty, prosperity for all. Sadly dies a young man. But here we all are, nearly 500 years later. We're still telling his story. And there he is, the gentleman on the corner. King James V himself. Now we know it's him because if you look right above him, you'll see a lion holding a crown with a plaque, I-5, Jacobus 5, James V. You'll see that inscription above each of these windows, I-5, Jacobus 5, James V. I am now, ladies and gentlemen, going to take you into the last of the royal buildings. It's the Chapel Royal, built by King James V. And we here before I take us in. I'm pointing out all the lines that you see here in the cobbles. These lines are marking the foundations of the previous chapel that stood here at Stirling, the Chapel of St Michael, built here around 1412. This is where Mary was crowned Queen of Scots. She was 9 months old. That small, they had to hold the crown above her head, and she cried the whole ceremony. She cried that much and made that much noise, they had to cut that ceremony short. This is where Mary had her son James christened before she parted in that great hall. But Mary's son James knocks this one down and builds this one in just over 6 months. We'll head inside. Gives birth here at Stirling Castle to James's firstborn child, a son, Henry Frederick. Now James was delighted. Not only now did he have the heir to the Scottish throne, he was telling everyone he had the heir to the English throne. He knew he was next in line. Elizabeth was on that throne down south, well past the age of giving birth, and James knew he was next. He didn't want to use the chapel that stood outside. It was tired, it was dated, even had a leaky roof. James wanted to impress. He wanted everyone that was coming here to Stirling for the christening of his firstborn child to know that not only was he capable of ruling Scotland, but he was more than capable of ruling England. Henry was carried through his doors on the 30th of August, 1594. Back then the ceiling was gold and heavy. The walls were adorned with tapestries and fine paintings. Standing in the middle of this chapel stood a golden font. It was encrusted with jewels to christen the baby. The king and all the nobles sat down this far corner. They were all sat on velvet chairs with their coat of arms embroidered on each individual chair. that great hall for a party to end all parties. And if you think his mother spent a lot of money, James blew that right out the water. He spent over £100,000 Scots on the building of this new Chapel Royal and the party that followed afterwards. Today's money, £17.5 million was spent here at Stirling Castle for the christening of one small child. The guests were sat in that great hall with their mouths open wide as a ship was brought in. It seemed even to float in its own sea. It was 40 feet high, 18 feet long and 8 feet wide. Aboard the ship were gods, Neptune, Triton, Faith and Liberty. The ladies were all dressed as mermaids. Their costumes were covered in jewels and fine pearls. They were there to serve the fish course. There were 36 brass cannons that fired intermittently throughout that evening meal, much to the amazement of all the guests that were there. Now, I don't know if anyone's read this saying, you push the boat out, but you're being rather extravagant. That's where the saying comes from. Afterwards, Henry was kept here at Stirling with his own small royal household, educated to a very high standard. By the age of 5, he was writing letters in French to nobles and ambassadors all over Europe. Henry was 9 when the family heads down south in 1603. He was brought up to be the greatest king that ever could be. But sadly, Henry never becomes king. Henry dies aged 18 after picking up an infection swimming in the River Thames. So when his father James passes away, it's Henry's younger brother who's crowned. And Charles I is crowned King of England. He's then on his way north to be crowned King of Scots. But everything up here was time dated. Remember, James revisited only once, so money was sent here to Stirling and wherever else Charles was going to visit to make sure it was fit for a king. And this frieze we see painted in the frame, this is the original, and it was painted inside this chapel in 1628 by an artist by the name of Valentine Jenkins, painted for the coronation years of Charles I. It was 1633 before Charles arrived in Stirling, deems everything unworthy, and promptly heads back down south. And all these boxes you'll see the honours of Scotland, the crown, the sword, the sceptre. The originals are still on display in Edinburgh Castle. You'll see the little arm, which is Latin French for king. At the opposite side, you'll see an iron index. King Jacobo VI, King James VI. Now, some of the colleagues think that's a C and a 1 for Charles I. Well, I'll let you make up your own mind. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is where I'm going to finish with you today. And I hope that you go round Stirling Castle and you enjoy it as much as I do. And please, don't be like James. Come back more than once.